This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have professor and author Jennifer N. Brown here to talk about her new release, The Lost Book of Elizabeth Barton. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Marie, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait because there is so much to dig into with this awesome novel. But before we get started, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
Yeah, so it's a dual timeline novel. One timeline is the 16th century, and it follows a real woman, Elizabeth Barton, who was a nun who had religious visions, including some kind of dangerous visions about Henry VIII and his marriage to Anne Boleyn. And those visions get her executed, which isn't a spoiler because I let everybody know pretty much in the first 2 pages that that's where that timeline is going. Oh, and I should say that a book of her visions, which is true, was written, and there are no surviving copies of them. They were claimed heretical by Henry VIII, and most of them were probably burned or lost or destroyed. So in the modern day timeline, there is a professor, Allison Sage, who's a researcher in this time period, researches women and visions, and she finds a copy of this lost book of Elizabeth, and it kind of accelerates her career. She gets invited to a exclusive get-together of academics in the English countryside, and it goes back and forth between the two stories, but the modern day story is a little bit of a thriller murder mystery.
And it was so fun how you started us off with, as you said, no spoiler alert, Elizabeth did die, and she died during a very tumultuous time in history. And one of the things I loved about this story, I have to admit, I'm a bit of a fan of that whole Tudor era. So I loved opening the book and finding the timeline that you gave us, where you really set all of this kind of origin story. It's kind of two timelines, but it's kind of the Elizabeth's story and the setting for everything that's going to come in the modern era.
Right.
And I loved that because it really, my goodness, Jennifer, there's one bullet saying, okay, well, this person comes to power. And then in the next bullet, a couple of years later, that person's out, and it's bloody and there's so much upheaval. What made you decide to choose the Elizabeth Barton story and that Tudor setting?
Yeah, so I also love the Tudor setting, and I am a professor of medieval literature. So actually a little bit earlier, but I kind of end in the Tudor era. And partly the reason that's kind of the bookend of my research is because it was the time when the national religion, right, changes from Catholicism to Protestantism, which is part of all of the upheaval that's going on. So I chose that period because it is such a tumultuous time, because there is so much going on, because the laws were unclear, because some days they were Catholic and some days they were Protestant, and some days you're, a hero, and the next day you're, being hung for that. And then Elizabeth has always fascinated me as a person, as a real person, because she was kind of in the middle of a lot of this, and is sort of forgotten, I think, at least by, not by scholars, but the outside world, about the role that she played. So, and because she was in touch with so many powerful men who were using her for different ends. So that's why I focused on her story. Yeah.
And what I loved about it was, even though we look back and say, oh, that's so many hundreds of years ago, and things are so different now, in certain ways, sadly, they're not necessarily that much different. And what I loved, you go back and you kind of give us Elizabeth's story, how this all happens for her with these visions, and what the drivers are at the time, and how I guess I was reminded so many times of the Salem witch trials
Mm-hmm.
because, in Joan of Arc, all of these females in history who get caught up in these fiery passions
Right.
and these visions or dreams or whatever they are in these fevered states, right?
Yeah.
And how, I think you mentioned that a little bit, how men who've had power in those eras glom onto it.
Right.
And I was wondering, how did you get a sense for that? Because there is some discussion about who was pushing her and maybe encouraging her. And if you are a farm girl, oh my gosh, if you don't have to be at hard labor anymore,
Right.
is there maybe some incentive to listen to these guys and what they want you to say?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you've really hit it right in the nail on the head. I mean, I think that for a lot of these women, and there were several women, that had these visions, it was a powerful place to be. I mean, you were the mouthpiece for God, right? And hard to deny that. On the other hand, the minute it was decided that actually, oh no, that wasn't a divine vision, that was demonic, or you're a charlatan, right? That role is over, and you're only useful until you're not useful anymore. And for Elizabeth, particularly, again, what's always interested me about her is that there were two historical events surrounding her that I found particularly interesting. One is that Henry VIII wanted to meet her and was really sort of excited by her in the beginning because at that point he was championing Catholicism and she seemed to be doing all the things he needed her to do, right? And then turned on her completely and had her executed. And the other was that we have the sermon that was read at her execution. And in that sermon, the priest accuses her confessor, Edward Bocking, who is a character, of planting these nefarious stories and ideas in her and that he was using her. So it's not just a modern day retrospective, was she being used? That was a question at the time. I mean, either way, she's getting executed, even if she was being used. But so I think that was part of what was interesting to me about her.
What was also very powerful in that final sermon is the idea that, yes, maybe she was being used, but there's also that dynamic of if a female was a mouthpiece and people listened and she had power, everyone wanted to say, oh, well, it's actually the guy that had the power, right?
Right. That's right. And she couldn't have possibly done this on her own. Yes. Yeah.
So it's an interesting push and pull almost in terms of how you feel about it, right? Is she truly just this instrument of all these men?
Right.
Or to some degree, does she have her own power and are they trying to take it from her once she gets it? So very convoluted in terms of how you feel emotionally as you're going through that story.
Totally. And which is why, as a scholar, I've always been desperate to find her book, right? I mean, that was kind of the genesis of the novel. Like, what would have happened if I found it? Because in some other cases, we do have writings of the women's themselves, and you can sort of compare it to what the men were saying about them. You can kind of figure out who's thinking what and how it's being used. And with Elizabeth, we only have these secondary sources. So,
and again, getting back to things have changed, but have they? You give us the modern time, and here's Allison with this amazing discovery, and she should be exalted and right there at the top of academia, getting to crow about her discovery. But you show us that in certain ways, maybe women still, powerful women, smart women, aren't welcome at the table. And just some of the comments you had, some of the characters, I think one of them makes a comment like, oh, well, you stumbled upon this.
right.
And it was so well done. And so it almost made me want to cry at times because it's like you're flashing between Allison today and Elizabeth back then. And there's still a lot of the same issues. The woman can't be the smart one in the room.
Right. Right. And is disempowered in a lot of ways and manipulated in a lot of ways. Yeah. 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 And I think that's true in a lot of, I mean, I do have a disclaimer at the end that everyone's been very welcoming to me in academia, and I've had a great experience as a professor. But I know that that wasn't really true for the group of women ahead of me. And I think that there's still a boys' club a little bit about in some of the areas. Yeah.
And coming back to the present time, oh my goodness, the mystery that you give us, the way that you seed it, the way you string us along and work us into it. Oh my goodness, so well done, Jennifer. So well done. So have you spent a lot of time out in the countryside where this beautiful manor house near the ruins? I'm assuming that exists, that the manor house is still there next to the ruins.
So that was a little fictionalized. I mean, there are ruins, I think, of her priory, but they really are minimal. Just, maybe a crumbling wall or something. But there are several manor houses that do exist like this, that are next to old priories or next to old churches. And there are also these kinds of small conferences that take place in them, which I have participated in. So it was a little bit putting all of that together and trying to think what that would look like if it was actually a murder mystery, because you kind of feel like you're entering an Agatha Christie novel when you show up at some of these old manor houses. And I was at one for a conference, and they were going over the parts of the house, so we knew where to go for dinner. And they said, just be careful of this room because there's a trap door in it. Just, why is there a trap door in that room? So those were all parts of the elements that I liked putting into it.
And again, what's fun about this is going back and having your second time period be this tumultuous time where there was so much bloodshed and there was so much uncertainty. No one could trust anyone. And right. To some degree, as we see with Elizabeth, can she even trust herself? And being able to go back and forth, and you put Allison into this situation where she's in this very moody manor that may have places secreted away. Right. And the origin of many of those places does come from this time period that Elizabeth's living in.
Yep, exactly.
And it's very, very interesting because, you have, like we talked about, you have book burning then. Mm-hmm. Now we do have some people who want to ban books. Mm-hmm. All of these things are very similar that we're kind of coming up against over and over again in history.
Yes. I mean, it's something as a historian, I think I find somewhat comforting, especially when we're in a difficult time period, to think, okay, we've been through some terrible time periods before and we've gotten through, right? But certainly the parallels weren't lost on me, and that was part of what I was interested in. I mean, England was such a completely divided country during the Reformation, and there were a lot of people who really just wanted to know what the result was going to be. Where do I place myself? Am I Catholic today? Am I Protestant? This is not important to me. I just want to live my life. And then there were other people who everything was about this back and forth. And of course, it affects the whole country, right? So that was part of what I was thinking when I was writing it, was how do you live in a turbulent time and make sense of it?
And what was so interesting, the way that you told Elizabeth's story and the way that you had Allison reflecting back on it, and her take on who was this woman, and in certain ways, how do I relate to her? Walking through these places, going through the ruins and wondering about the whispers, the voices of the people who've gone before. I think there's a scene even in the manor where she's touching a railing on a staircase, and she thinks about how many people have done that. And it was such a beautiful scene, that one with the railing, and other times that you did it. Like I said, there's a church there with the ruins, and you replayed that theme multiple times. And I absolutely loved it, because every time I go anywhere that has any kind of roots, anything 100 years or more, I'm always thinking about that. And certainly Europe is so full of those types of places.
Yeah. And there are these places in England where these pre-Reformation paintings survive and stained glass windows survive, even though most of them were destroyed. So you also think, how did that survive? How was that protected? Who was, keeping that painting from being whitewashed over? And they are questions that are always in my mind as a researcher. And then I tried to convey that through Allison, for sure.
And I think that's what was so much fun, looking back on a time where I don't even know how everyone survived that time, because the sands were constantly shifting beneath their feet. Like you said, am I a Protestant today? Am I a Catholic tomorrow? And the amount of people who are just going through the cycle of death, literally just people getting like ground up in this till of religion, that ironically everyone's trying on either side to say this is the religion and this is the hellfire and this is the right path, and they're killing people to do it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I really wanted the timeline in the beginning, and I'm glad that you recognize that, because it's actually not a very long period of time, and there's so much back and forth and so much destruction on both sides, so much death on both sides, and a lot of uncertainty. And it really doesn't get settled until after Queen Elizabeth, and she had a very long reign. But even during her reign, there were always these threats and attempts on her life, and coups or attempted coups, right? So it was culturally just overtook the country for a long, long time. And I really enjoyed sort of trying to follow the people who, not the major players, but the second rung of players who were there. Yeah.
Now I have to ask, because it was the question that was burning inside of me the entire time. Where do you think the lost book of Elizabeth Barton could be?
Well, I mean, we do still find manuscripts that we thought were lost, and they tend to be in some of the places I suggested, in attics, right? In, these old family homes where there have been papers that have been put away and forgotten. And sometimes they're found in monasteries. And there was a big group of Catholics who left England and went to Belgium and went to Portugal. So, part of me feels like maybe it's there. I mean, there were several hundred copies of her book, and the fact that not even a fragment of one has been found makes me think that really it's out there somewhere. We'll find it.
Well, I'm hoping so, and I'm hoping that you're the one to find it.
That would be great. There'll have to be another novel.
Well, and maybe there's one of those sitting in a hidey hole somewhere underneath a trap door in one of these houses.
That's right. I mean, every time there's an excavation of some old site or old house, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that something amazing will be found, because these books, they turn up. They still turn up. Yeah.
Well, again, I just love the way you set up the mystery. I love the clues that you seeded. And when it all came together in the end, it was just so very perfect, because I every time you'd mention something, and of course I don't give spoilers, but there were so many little clues where you'd set us up for something by telling us, oh, this was a custom of the time. Mm. And then you'd say, oh, well, maybe the Victorians would have done this. And then you find something that, oh, it was just so good, Jennifer.
Thank you. It was so much fun to write. I'm so used to writing academic work, which is painstaking and requires a lot of research and time just to get, a footnote right. And this was it was so liberating and fun, and to sort of let my imagination go and think, what would this look like if I was at a conference that actually ended up being this kind of closed door manor house mystery.
So very fun. Now, I do have to ask, Jennifer, when you are not deep in the archives, when you are not writing fantastic mysteries, what do you do for fun?
What do I do for well, I'm a runner and I love to run. So that and I think a lot of my writing is done running mentally. I think both academic and for fiction, I'm processing information when I run. And I have 2 kids and 2 dogs, so that takes a lot of a lot of time. And I read. And I read a ton. And as you probably guessed, I love a good mystery novel and I love a good thriller. So that's definitely frequently on in my to read pile as a good way to pass the time and for fun. Yeah.
Now, Jennifer, for all the folks who are going to adore this and want to know what's coming next for you, where is the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, so probably my website, which is jennifer-brown.com, or Jennifer N. Brown Writes on Instagram. Those are good places to find me. And the book comes out April 14th, and I'm doing a few readings in New York and some in Boston, some in Connecticut, all Northeast for now, but hopefully I'm adding some more to that. So all those events are listed on the website, and I'd love to see people at them.
Outstanding. Well, anyone who loves an atmospheric mystery and anyone who especially loves the Tudor era, although you do not have to know anything about it because Jennifer does such a good job outlining all of it and drawing you so immediately in, you feel like you got in the time machine to spend some time there. Again, the book is The Lost Book of Elizabeth Barton, and it is amazing.
Thank you so much, Marie. I'm so glad you liked it. It's so exciting to hear people's reactions to it.
Well, thank you for writing such a wonderful book. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.